most of my background, I'm a clinical psychologist and a research coordinator at the University of Newcastle. For the first 3 webinars, I've been on the other side of the screen, but tonight I'm just going to provide a bit of an introduction to our presenters and do a quick recap of the first 3 webinars that we've done. So if we could just move to the next slide. And I'll just give you some directions. So our webinar tonight is arranged. It's the last day in the 5 days. And if you have any questions or comments that you wanted to post throughout the webinar, you can do that by clicking at the top on your software bar. If we could just move to the next slide, we've got some instructions. Oh no, yep. Sorry. Just the more button and then chat, and then you can make sure you're posting your message to everyone. We'll have someone monitoring that to let us know any questions that we have as we go through, but we should have some time at the end for questions as well.
Chris, is it possible to turn the audio up any more on your end? It's just the mic's pretty soft.
Tonight we've got myself, as I said, we've got Adrian Dunlop joining us online as well, the Director of Drug and Alcohol Clinical Services at Untitled Chapter. We've also got Phil Carr, Service Manager of Clinical Services at Hunter Primary Care, Kylie Bailey, Clinical Manager of Drug and Alcohol Counselling Services at Hunter Primary Care, Agatha Conrad, Ex-Community Research Manager at Hunter Mental Health Services, and Richard Clancy, who is a Mental Health Nursing Research Fellow. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so just a quick recap from our first 3 webinars. We do have these, the webinars and the slides posted on the PHN website, so you can catch up on those, and we'll give you a link to those at the end of the webinar. But just briefly, on our first webinar on the 6th of February, we talked about the first A, which was us. And some key points to that were that substance use is common in a GP setting. So this is clients that you're really seeing all the time, and we had Hester Wilson talking us through some kind of approaches that you can use to normalise asking about drug and alcohol use and comorbid mental health with your clients. And we talked through using the SNAP guidelines, which are really helpful. But basically just normalising asking about drug and alcohol use as part of a review of all kind of lifestyle factors, and really that patients are accepting GPs and practice nurses to ask about these kind of things. And so in the ask, we want to know what people are using, how often they're using it, how much they're using it, and how they're using it. And we talked through that it can be helpful to characterise harmful use or dependence. And we had Amanda Baker talking us through the importance of thinking about comorbidities, so mental health issues as well when we're thinking about drug and alcohol problems, because we know that often they can go hand in hand. And we also talked through some useful screening tools like the audit, and there's some good screen grabs there and some of the slides from the first webinar if you want to have a look at those. So moving on to the next slide. In our second webinar, which was advice, we looked at some brief interventions, and I guess one of the key points from that was that brief interventions are effective, and we know that one of those is motivational interviewing, and we talked through a few skills with that, but basically it would be a good idea to seek some further training in motivational interviewing as well. And we also had Stephen Ling talking through the nurse's role in drug and alcohol and using the SNAP guidelines as well, and highlighting that this really is something that can be a key part of general practice nurses' role. We talked about considering the patient's motivation to change, so we looked at the stages of change, and perhaps tailoring your intervention to where the patient is situated on that stage of change, and goal setting as well, so things like SMART goals when you're coming up with behaviour change goals with your patients. And in our third webinar, which was the last one we did a couple of weeks ago, that was based on the assist from the 5 A's. And again, we talked a little bit more about brief interventions by just going into some of the skills of motivational interviewing and cognitive behaviour therapy. And we talked through some case examples there. And we had Adrian Dunlop talking us through management of drug and alcohol problems with both pharmacotherapy and counselling, which we know to be effective. And we also just talked about the need to be considering and monitoring mental health symptoms when you're looking at alcohol and other drug treatment. Again, because we know that often these issues are co-occurring. And I guess one of the key messages we left you with in the last webinar was that it's important to maintain optimism and reinforce the small changes that your patients are making, because sometimes it will be small changes that they're making, and it's important to reinforce those and each change attempt that they make, because it might be a long-term change that they're making. So tonight, our webinar, the last webinar in this series, is Arrange. And we've got Adrian back with us to talk about Hunter New England Drug and Alcohol Services and how to refer and who's eligible and all of those sorts of things. We've got Kylie and Phil talking about the drug and alcohol services at Hunter Primary Care. And we've got Richard and Agatha talking about the mental health and substance use service here at the Mater, as well as the mental health line and the Psychiatric Emergency Care Centre. And just as everyone talks through, if there's any questions or sort of de-identified case referral questions that you'd like to ask, that would certainly be welcome, and we'll try and get to them at the end of the webinar. So I'll hand you over to Adrian now to speak a little bit about Hunter New England Drug and Alcohol Services. Thanks, Adrian.
Thank you very much, Kristen. So I'm going to make it reasonably simple. We don't have a high threshold for accepting referrals. That may have to change in time to come, but at this stage we don't have a high threshold for referrals. So essentially we'll accept self-referrals, a patient self-referring, or a referral from a general practitioner or another sort of health practitioner of patients generally all of the time. It is useful more recently in the last year or so, if we can get a general practitioner referral, we really do like to involve the GP in the patient's care, even if we're looking after a bunch of issues around their alcohol or drug use. It's great to have a GP engaged as well with the patient's care. So yeah, we encouraged general practitioner referrals, but patients can self-refer. So there's a single entry point across Newcastle, Greater Newcastle, Hunter Valley, the New England area, and the Lower Mid-North Coast. The phone number actually diverts to either Newcastle or to Tamworth or to Taree, depending on where the person's located, but the number is the same. And that's the number there, 1300 660 059. And that service is open Monday to Friday from 8:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. And so generally what happens at that stage is that we take some brief details from the patient, get a sense of which substance it is that's an issue for them. We do a sort of a rapid mental health check to make sure somebody's not unstable from a mental health perspective and needs some sort of urgent or more urgent mental health response. And then we work out the most appropriate service to refer the patient to for a more detailed assessment, and then work out what sort of treatment they might need. And that can occur at one of a number of sites at the Newcastle Community Health Centre, at some other community health centres, and sometimes elsewhere, depending on exactly what the patient needs, Belmont Hospital or elsewhere. I didn't put up, and I should have put up, the fax number, so referrals can be faxed too, and the fax number is 401 64661, and so it's possible to refax referrals there too. once we've got a referral, then the sorts of treatment we might offer after having done an assessment might be a counselling intervention, or it might be a withdrawal intervention. It might be methadone or buprenorphine treatment if the patient's dependent on opioids. And there are a number of other specialist clinics we have. So we have a drugs and pregnancy service that runs the John Hunter. We have a pain and addiction clinic that we run with the Hunter Integrated Pain Service. So there are some other specialist clinics too. And then I should also mention, separate to ours, but we work very closely with, is the Calvary Mater Drug and Alcohol Service. So Craig Sadler's the director of that service, and he also works part-time with us. There's the phone number for referrals there, and they also accept fax referrals. And the reason to promote that, many GPs might be familiar with this service. They run a daily outpatients clinic from Monday to Friday that usually has a registrar and consultant and a nursing staff member. And they also do run generally urgent only, but outpatient clinics on Saturdays and Sundays. So some days, for example, patients who are doing an outpatient alcohol withdrawal and need reviewing over the weekend, we can organise referrals or daily attendance to those if they need to be checked on daily. And then there, Dr. Sadler does admit some patients for inpatient withdrawal there as well, so that's possible too. So that's a thumbnail sketch. To just give you a bit more detail, if we could go on to the next slide, please. So there is a health pathways pathway for drug and alcohol services, and it does give a bit more detailed information about all of the local drug and alcohol services, including some services that we don't run. So there are a handful of non-government organisations that run typically residential rehabilitation services, so places where people go to stay, usually after they've withdrawn from whatever the substance they've been using is, and then they stay there for a period of time to try to develop other life skills so they don't relapse. But there are also some daycare, sort of intensive outpatient type programs that exist, and they're detailed on the health pathways section. And that again will have the referral methods possible for drug and alcohol and for the Calvary Mater and for some other services. And I know Kylie's going to talk to you a bit, so I won't talk too much more about other options locally, but there are other options as well. And then if we could go to the next slide. So another important service that in my mind is underutilised that exists across the state. It's a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week, every day of the year service. It's a telephone support service for clinicians seeing patients with current drug and alcohol problems. And it's to get clinical advice about how to manage a patient. So clearly we can, well, this service, it's a state-wide service. There's no capacity to actually clinically review a patient, but the consultant on call can give advice about issues about an assessment or how to manage a withdrawal. We don't all who work on that service have a detailed knowledge of exactly what local services exist if you don't know your local services. But the process is you ring that 1-800 number, or there's a Sydney Metro number 2, and the first person that you speak to does have a database of local services, so you can ask them about that as well. And that's a very important way of providing services, especially after hours and on weekends to rural parts of the state, but also during the week, across the week in urban and regional areas as well. And then also just to promote, if people aren't familiar, there is a patient information line, the alcohol and drug information system, that patients or their family or friends can use if they want to find out some more information about how to get help, what sorts of help exist. And again, there's a 1-800 number and a Sydney Metro number. So Erin, that's all the slides I had, but very happy to talk any more about any of those services.
No questions just yet.
Great.
I'd like to ask the
GP decides to make a referral to health, what kinds of information would your service need to help triage that patient?
Sorry, the audio is really low. I couldn't hear what you said.
So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what information that Hunter New England Health National Services need from a GP in order to better triage that referral.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Yep. So the question is, what information do we need to triage somebody? Look, essentially, you know, the more the better. But the key issues really are what substance or substances, because often people use multiple substances, often tobacco in combination with, you know, another substance like alcohol or cannabis or other drugs. So what substances are an issue for the patient? If there are any current medical concerns, if there are any current mental health concerns, and if there's any other significant psychosocial issues. So if the patient's going to become homeless or has to attend court, or, you know, anything else that's a precipitating factor. Often, as you know, people there are driven to treatment because there's a crisis. So it's important to know about them when we're trying to work out what's the most appropriate response. That's essentially, in a nutshell, what we need to know.
Well, we might move on then to Kylie and Bill telling us about primary care and drug and alcohol service.
Sure, no, thanks very much, Adrian, for that start. So Kylie and I are here representing Hunter Primary Care. I'll leave Kylie to talk a lot more about the clinical and operational aspects of our service in terms of drug and alcohol treatment. However, I just wanted to put a focus in terms of the big picture to provide people with a bit of context to our funding that we've received. So in 2017, the Hunter New England Central Coast Private Health Network, or PHN as they're called, we were successful as an organisation to be funded to deliver drug and alcohol treatment in the primary care sector. It's certainly an area of need. It's another big aim is really about sort of integrating care through sort of better coordination of services, as well as targeting areas of need or where there's gaps within those services. We all appreciate there's often big gaps within sort of health services generally, particularly mental health, drug and alcohol. Perhaps this funding is not aimed just to resolve all that, but certainly to increase capacity within the sector. I guess the other big aim that we're trying to focus on is really improving effectiveness of drug and alcohol treatment, particularly for people in the early stages of substance misuse who are presenting to primary care, principally GPs, who are seeking or wanting some information about changing their substance use. So the funding really is important, is it's really not here to replicate or to duplicate services. It's really focused on looking at where those gaps are within the primary care sector and to deliver very effective evidence-based care. And as I mentioned earlier, the services, like some of our colleagues on the panel tonight, are very much aimed at people in the early stages of substance misuse. Those experiencing mild to moderate presentations in drug and alcohol, and Kylie will elaborate more on what that actually means in terms of a clinical level. And probably one of the big things now in terms of particularly mental health and drug and alcohol is looking at the notion of step care. And we know that in terms of step care models in health, where people access care at the right level and at the right time, at their right need, is really important rather than a one-size-fits-all approach. So certainly our service focuses more on the low intensity end, more to face-to-face services, which Kylie will talk about. The other important part of what we're really trying to do is provide more integration. So the idea for us is no wrong door. So if people are accessing our services, particularly from primary care, is if they're needing or requiring more specialised services that our colleagues in under New England Area Health and certainly in the MHSUS services can provide, we certainly are wanting to link them in with sort of more active referrals. So in terms of the funding itself, we've been largely funded to deliver in the Hunter region, which includes the major sort of metro areas of Newcastle, Macquarie, Port Stephens and Singleton. We'd love to sort of fund more areas, but at this stage we're certainly focused on those major areas of need. So rather than for me to continue to talk, I'll pass over to my colleague Polly to talk more specifically about the services.
So thank you, Phil, for that. So I'd just like to highlight before we talk about what we actually deliver, is that our funding is for anybody who's 16 years and over with a mild to moderate alcohol misuse or substance misuse, as well as if they've got comorbid mental health that are and their symptoms are in the mild to moderate range. So we're a little bit different in that we're not a tertiary service, so we're not funded to target people at this end of the spectrum. We're trying to catch people at this end of the spectrum who might be using for self-medication, they might be working and their drinking or drugging is starting to affect their work attendance. So we're trying to capture these people and hopefully prevent them from moving along to requiring that more specialist intense level of care. And if we look in that stepped care profile, tertiary services are regarded as high intensity services, whereas we offer low to moderate intensity services in that stepped care model. So our first project that I'm going to talk to you about is our MindReach program, and it's a low intensity intervention whereby a client works through a CBT workbook that is focused on their symptoms. So for the person, they might want to work on their mental health symptoms first before working on their drug and alcohol symptoms first, and we can accommodate that. The workbook is supported over the telephone in proper telephone appointments that usually last an hour long, and that's monitored and supported by Kelly, who is our mental health clinician. So at intake or the initial referral, Kelly will contact the patient and she will do an assessment over the phone to make sure that their symptoms match a low intensity intervention and that they don't require counselling, which is our moderate intensity intervention, or a more specialist service. So once that assessment's conducted and risk is assessed, if the patient and Kelly agree that MindReach is the best service for them, then they'll be given an appointment time, which is 2 weeks after the phone assessment, and the patient will be sent either by email or by letter, whichever the patient nominates as their preferred method, a welcome letter that has their appointment time on it, as well as crisis numbers, including that ADIS number and mental health numbers. And they're also sent the first module of their workbook. We don't send the whole workbook because there's 10 modules in it and it can be quite overwhelming. So the patient will be working through that workbook module over those 2 weeks. Then they'll attend their phone appointment with Kelly, who will work through the skills in that workbook and see how they found the skills covered in that workbook, have they been able to implement them, how they've gone with the exercises, and help them if they're stuck with anything. Sometimes people may need 2 appointments to go through one module. Sometimes patients can go through 2 modules in one appointment. So it's very varied and flexible to what the patient's needs are. During that intervention, if at any stage Kelly and the patient identify that their symptoms have increased or a situation has happened and their risk of around suicidal ideation has increased, Then we'll step them up to our moderate intensity intervention, which is counselling, and if needs be to high intensity, such as mental health or the specialist drug and alcohol services. So once that's been, once the intervention's conducted, as per counselling, they'll be offered an aftercare appointment, which I'll talk about shortly. With counselling, it's our standard 12 sessions, 10 to 12 sessions. They're delivered face to face, but we can also deliver our appointments over the telephone. So we've had a few people take that option just due to work commitments or other commitments that they've had. Again, in counselling, if it becomes identified that the patient would benefit more from Mindridge because their symptoms are quite contained and their life, you know, their commitments with life, with work, with family, prevents them from coming in, then we can step them down and transfer them to Mindridge. But conversely, if their symptoms escalate, we can step them up to that more high intensity care. So with our aftercare, the aim of aftercare is for relapse prevention. So everybody who's under our drug and alcohol program, upon their final appointment, whether it be Mindridge or counselling, are offered an aftercare appointment. So that's 1 month post their last treatment session. And the focus of that appointment is to check in and see how they're going, how are they coping with their skills, have they faced any high-risk situations, and just to identify if they are vulnerable, do they need to come back to and see us for appointments. At the end of that aftercare appointment, if they don't need follow-up, don't need to return to counselling or to Mindridge, then we'll offer them a second, which will be their final aftercare appointment. And again, depending on patient needs, that will be 1 month or 2 months after their initial aftercare appointment. We are finding that the majority of our patients aren't requiring or aren't accepting an aftercare appointment. But those that do typically prefer a telephone appointment. And it's a great way of capturing people who are at risk of lapsing or relapsing because an unexpected psychosocial stressor has come up. For example, we recently had someone whose father unexpectedly died, and we were able to put them straight back into counselling. So it helps with that continuity of care. So our final part of our funding is with care coordination, and that can happen both during treatment or at that intake level. So with care coordination, if someone does need to be stepped up or stepped down, we're funded to have the time to be able to facilitate that for that person and do a handover and connect them in with the either low or the high intensity service or intervention. Or if they need another service that's outside mental health or drug and alcohol, we can actively refer and connect them with that service. At the intake level, if we have a referral that comes in for drug and alcohol that there's either not enough information or there's information that appears that they need much more support than what we can actually offer, what we'll do is we'll call that person, do a phone assessment and decide whether or not with them if we're the best fit for their symptoms, or do we need to transfer their care to a special service like Hunter New England Drug and Alcohol Services, the Martin, MHSUS, or mental health. So that fits in with the no wrong door policy, and with that we have with that no wrong door policy, it's about that client or that patient only having to make one phone call, and it just means they either sit on our waiting list or they sit on another services waiting list, and they don't have to follow through with anything further. So if you've referred someone who we've deemed and they've agreed that they need more support and we have their consent to transfer their referral, then we will ring you to obtain your consent to transfer your referral to that other service. Next slide. So just very quickly, there are 2 referral pathways. You can send us a comprehensive referral letter that outlines their alcohol and other drug misuse symptoms and patterns of use, as well as any comorbid mental health symptoms and anything that's sort of going on for that patient, as well as what the treatment goals are and that you're referring to the drug and alcohol program. And you can fax that referral to our secure fax line 49297072. However, patients can self-refer and other organisations can refer to us as well. So they will call our number on 49260529. We have psychologists on intake or do referral management in the afternoon. So they're the best times to catch people, and when we're doing intake, we'll contact your patient, or we'll contact you, or we'll contact whoever's doing the self-referral and conduct that phone assessment and triage accordingly. So that's all I have to say, other than we're not funded to provide any court reports or for any mandated court counselling. So thank you.
Thank you. Kylie, I might ask you a similar question to what you asked Adrian previously, just in terms of the key components of your referral for drug and alcohol. In that referral letter, do you have a template, or are there some key items that you think are important to include?
We do have a referral form, but I've noticed that GPs prefer to either write their own letter or they might stick to the mental health care plan. And if they do send a mental health care plan, the patient doesn't use those sessions, so they still have that mental health care plan sitting there. So the key information that we look for is how much they're using, how frequently they're using, the duration of that using, any context of that, have they had any periods of abstinence, has there been any changes to their drinking or using patterns, has it increased, or have they been actively reducing? So just any of that background information. If there's any psychosocial stresses going on, do they have any mental health symptoms? And I suppose what we notice is that sometimes we get referral for patients to our service for mental health, but at that initial assessment, we're finding that if they're having troubles with sleeping, that they might be drinking or having a few cones at night to help them sleep. And that tends to be a little bit missed. So, but that's sort of the nature of the people that we're seeing, because they're more at this end of the spectrum, and then there is that perspective of drug use being at this end. So it's just about people reconceptualising how drug use fits in with mental health. And it is worthy of having that conversation, because what we find is you might have 3 or 4 cones to help you get to sleep, but what happens if you have a stressful day, or what happens if you're going through a stressful period? Those 3 to 4 cones won't cut it, so they'll have 4 or 5. And then over time, their body has adjusted to those levels of cannabis being in their system, or alcohol, or whatever it is that they're using in their system. So they'll use a little bit more and use a little bit more. So I tend to find drug use is a little bit more insidious, and it's gradual, and it happens over time. So we want to try and capture those people. So if you find that your patients are using for those reasons, or to help unwind at the end of the day, you know, or to help with social anxiety, that's very helpful for us, so that we can quite quickly work out a treatment plan for them.
Yes, thank you. I'll hand over to Richard and Agatha.
Yeah, I'll start. So Richard and I are going to take you to the other side of the spectrum, and we're going to talk about referrals to mental health services in particular cases and the mental health line. So I'll cover the mental health line, and Richard will give some more details about the referral process. So you can refer to the mental health line either by calling them on 1-800 number 011 511, or faxing your referral 67678731. If you give them a call and you get through, it's for the mental health line, they can gather a lot more detailed information than what's actually people supply in the letters, and I think you're finding that too. So, this service is kind of for the whole Hunter New England area, so you can appreciate that the volume of phone calls that they get is is quite a lot. And I've included a little bit of statistics just to give you a perspective of what they deal with. So in the 3 months till March this year, they've actually had 7,558 calls. That is roughly 2,396 per month. In terms of faxes, they received 2,578 faxes in those 3 months, and that's 860 per month. So they're dealing with large volume of work. People basically calling mental health line GPs, services, and so forth. Next slide. So in terms of the referral criteria for the mental health line, so any person with a severe mental illness, it would be an appropriate referral, but you need to also indicate the urgency of referral that's appropriate for that. So if you're seeing patients who are at risk of them to themselves, of self-harming or wanting to harm others, and for instance, if you're seeing a patient who, tells you in the room that they're going to kill themselves by the end of the week, they have a plan, they have means of killing themselves, they have a cocktail of medications at home that they've been taking, they have a past history of previous suicide attempts, that would be kind of, and obviously they have a mental health illness, that would be very appropriate for mental health line. And the more information you can provide in the referral letter, they're actually better for the mental health. Now, in some circumstances, you may want to, for instance, get some clarification on diagnosis or get a medication review for the patient from a psychiatrist. The preferable treatment would be to provide the letter, again, with background history of the patient, the medication that they're taking and what the issues are, and sort of name the psychiatrist actually on the letter, so that the mental health line, once they receive that referral through either fax or phone call, they can straight away forward it efficiently to the actual service or the psychiatrist. And so the referral doesn't get actually lost in the process, or it doesn't get delayed. You can also, there are services that you can directly refer to. For instance, you can directly refer to the Center for Psychotherapy. This service provides treatment for people with borderline personality disorder and eating disorders. You can also directly refer people for eating disorders to the DAY program, which is also based at James Ledger Hospital. If people have needing a neuropsychiatry assessment, you can directly refer to the neuropsychiatry service. Richard will cover the uses referrals. So think carefully about who to refer to. There's some avenues that you can actually directly refer, instead of referring to the mental health line that perhaps may delay the referral, you can actually directly refer to some mental health services. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I indicated before, it's very, very important to indicate the urgency of response. So if you, as I gave you that example of a patient with a clear plan wanting to suicide by the end of the week, obviously that referral is high urgency. It's a high-risk patient that you're referring. So what the mental health line will do, they have a 48-hour window of contacting the person, and within that time, they will attempt to contact the person as much as they can. And they use different means. They use by either calling the person, texting the person 1-800 number with a clear text message that if there's a service calling them or contacting them for the client to call them back, or trying to contact the family. Once, in cases where the person gets contacted and they are triaged and it's clear at the end of this assessment that they're at risk to themselves or others, the mental health line will provide a safety plan for the individual prior to the referral to the community mental health team. Now, the community mental health team will follow this individual up within 48 hours again, and they are usually the service that will get back to the referral, so that you potentially will get a referral back, a letter back from the community mental health team. Now, in some instances where people ring the mental health line and it's clear at the triage, at the end of triage, that there's no need for a mental health service, but there might be a need for another service, like perhaps referring it to a psychologist through the PHN, the mental health line will make that recommendation and either write back to the reviewer, or if it's a self-referral, they'll tell the patient to go and see another service. So they will always follow the patient up and make sure that the patient has the right service. Now, we know sometimes that mental health clients are sometimes not very easy to contact. And as it happens, if you refer someone to the mental health line, the mental health line will try and contact the person, but sometimes it is impossible to contact the person. They will try and contact the family. If they absolutely can't contact the person, and from the referral, it's very clear that this person has a clear plan, is very high risk of attempting suicide, what they will do in those circumstances, they will contact the mental health team and they will pass on the referral, or they may give you a call back and say, look, how much of a risk this person is to themselves or to others. And in those circumstances, they will get the mental health team to follow them up. Now, the mental health team, the acute team within the Huntington has capacity to actually go to someone's home and visit them, which the mental health line doesn't, because they're not that sort of service. So in those circumstances, again, the person will be followed up by the community mental health team. The other sort of urgency of response is kind of 14 days. And those referrals are usually where there's no risk to self or others. And those referrals will usually refer to getting they're usually private psychiatrist referrals, where if you want clarification of diagnosis, or if you want medication review, you would clearly state that information with the name of the psychiatrist, and the mental health line then would ensure that the referral is passed on to the right team in an efficient way. Sometimes the mental health line will get a referral that's clearly for centre for psychotherapy or psychiatrist services. Again, thinking carefully what's the appropriate service is important, given the volume of phone calls that they get. And I think that's all for me. So I'll pass it on to Richard, and he will cover MHSUS.
Okay, thanks, Agatha. Before I move on to MHSUS, the Mental Health and Substance Use Service, I'll just talk a little bit about the Psychiatric Emergency Care Centre based at the MARTA campus in Waratah in Newcastle. So probably the best way to access the PECC, or the Psychiatric Emergency Care Centre, is for people to contact the mental health line, the 1800 number first. That way, instead of sending someone to the MARTA where they may or may not be admitted, so if you do refer someone there, it is for assessment, not for admission. Instead of someone's expectations being high that they will be admitted, more information can be gathered over the phone and the right referral pathway taken. But sometimes it's good to let people know that presenting to the ED at the MARTA is an option if someone's mental health deteriorates and it's the middle of the night and they don't know where else to go, then presenting to the ED might be very appropriate. So the way that people from the community would access that would be presenting to the ED at the MARTA at the General Hospital, where they'll be triaged, and if a mental health assessment is required, then move through to the Psychiatric Emergency Care Centre from there. Now, as a GP, you may be required to write a schedule for someone under Section 19 of the Mental Health Act. So a schedule is essentially a transportation document. That's a legal document that's available on the Health Pathways website that can be completed once a thorough assessment has taken place of a person. They have a serious mental illness or they are disordered as defined under the Mental Health Act. And in that situation, the idea is if the least restrictive way of transferring the person to the hospital for a more thorough mental health assessment is transfer via the ambulance or the police or someone from the mental health team, if there is a mental health team already involved in the case, then completion of this document means that those people can assist in transport. So far we've spoken about people with acute mental health needs, accessing mental health services, people with less acute mental health and drug and alcohol needs are accessing some of the PHN services, and people with mild to severe substance use problems accessing the drug and alcohol clinical services. I'll speak now a little bit about an additional service that we've got in the Hunter, the Mental Health and Substance Use Service, or MHSUS. So we're quite fortunate in the Hunter that we have a service that's unique in Australia, and the service is able to provide a combined integrated mental health and substance use treatment program for people who are able to access group-based programs at the MARTA site. So if people aren't aware, the MARTA site has 2 hospitals located on it. One is the Calvary MARTA service for general hospital services, and does have a drug and alcohol service that Adrian spoke about, and also has a mental health service on the same location, including the mental health and substance use service that is funded through the mental health services of the Hunter. So the main programs that operate from there are outpatient programs that people access through the day. So a referral to this service can be made by the GP or by the person themselves, or can come through the mental health line. The numbers on the screen for making direct referrals. Importantly, this is a daytime only program. There's no outreach or crisis response that's available. So this is for people who are not acutely unwell. And just to give you some sense of what to expect when a referral is made, there's usually a delay of at least 2 weeks before an assessment can be conducted. So we're not talking about urgent interventions here. What sometimes happens though, if the person needs to detox, if they go to an inpatient detox centre or are getting assistance with detox through their GP or through drug and alcohol clinical services, we can try to align the day program to follow that detox service on the day that detox is completed if a person comes out of the inpatient detox, just to make sure there's no gap there where the person might fall through. So I don't want to give you too much information about the different programs that are available, but just as a bit of an indication, the main program that people might be aware of is a 2-week outpatient psychoeducational motivational program. It runs 4 days a week over a 2-week period, and it's for people who probably see themselves as having primarily a substance use problem, and also are likely to have a pretty serious psychological problem or situational crisis, or a well-controlled mental illness, where they're able to sit in group programs that run most of the day. That program's quite useful for people. People tend to enjoy being there. That's an abstinence-based program, so it's a program where we ask people not to use for the 2 weeks of the program that they are there, and that they stop using for a few days before, so that they're not in withdrawal during the program. The other programs tend to focus on mostly on people with serious mental illness and comorbid substance use. And here people don't need to have made a change in their substance use. So people might still be using substances while they're attending these. So there's a range of those. The Double Trouble program, the Moving On program. Rather than giving you the criteria for each of those, it's best if you ring a clinician, speak to the clinician, and say that you have a person that might be useful to have an assessment to see if they're suitable for one of the programs, or to find the most appropriate program to suit. And finally, just a brief chat about the anti-abuse program. So this is a fairly unique group-based program in Australia, where we provide anti-abuse or disulfiram for people who've completed the 2-week outpatient program and want some follow-up with a weekly meeting and a group-based program to support their recovery and their abstinence. So disulfiram is a medication that essentially makes people allergic to alcohol. So when people choose to go on this, they are deciding that they want to be abstinent rather than cutting down their alcohol use. And that program, we encourage people to stay with that for about a year, attending once a week for a meeting and picking up a week's supply of a medication that they access free of charge. So the Mental Health and Substance Use Service, based at the MARTA campus in Newcastle, and my advice would be to ring the number on the screen there, the 4033 5600, and ask to speak to a clinician about what program might be most suitable and discussing your client with a clinician if possible. So I think I'll wind up there and hand back to Kristen.
Sure. I just thought it important to mention just another couple of services. The Quitline there, obviously for smoking. The New South Wales Quitline now accepts online referrals. So there's an online referral form there, which makes it a little bit easier, and the link is there on the slide. And also just the Get Healthy service, which is a government-funded New South Wales service that provides free telephone-based health coaching, and that's around things such as reducing your alcohol use, increasing exercise, and healthy eating and weight loss. So there's a link there for how to refer as well. But other than that, I might just check if we've had any questions on the chat line. But does the panel have any questions or key points that they think important to note for GPs and practice nurses to know about referring to your services? Are there any, I guess, common mistakes, if we want to call them, with referrals, or key bits of information missing that you find would be a good opportunity now to?
I think the common theme among all of us is that the detail of the referral is important. Yes, it's really important. The history, what medications they have, what diagnosis they have. In the case of the mental health line, it's under risk and for your service as well. So that sort of detail of information, I think, is quite important. I think that's a key message for referrals. I think for the mental health line, if GPs can get through the mental health line, that really provides that richness for the triage people. I'm sure in your service it's the same. If people can get through, but if they don't, having a good detailed letter, so that the mental health line or your service or MHSUS can actually ascertain are they appropriate referral, are they not, and you can respond.
Actually, I might just add in one thing too. I think sometimes there's a temptation to mark a referral as being urgent because that means that the person's likely to get treatment earlier. But that can cause problems for mental health clinicians where medico-legally the need to follow up someone is so time-consuming that if a large number of referrals come through marked as high urgency, clinical time is taken up with trying to follow up people who really don't need the urgency of follow-up, and then the urgent people have to wait longer to be seen. So just that little point there I think is important.
The only thing that I want to add, and it's just a little bit on a different tangent, is that people often forget to write or ask questions about the route of administration. So, like for amphetamines, for example, you can snort, swallow, inject, smoke. So having an idea of if someone's injecting or smoking or snorting can help us triage, as well as finding out if people smoke cigarettes when they're smoking cannabis, and do they mix tobacco in with their cannabis, because that's another layer of treatment consideration that we need to look at if the person is looking at reducing their cannabis use, because for our program you don't have to be abstinent or aim to be abstinent. We have a harm minimisation approach as well. So just having enough of that background information can just fast track the assessment process and the triaging process from our end.
There's a couple of questions here. David King says, I was in late, so may have missed the info about inpatient detox, alcohol and narcotics. Any specific information about detox?
Well, that would be the information that Adrian provided. So there will be, Sorry, Adrian's
Adrian's
just
popped
back
back.
on screen now.
As far as
Yeah, to local inpatient with there's the and that's through the number we gave before, the ARA drug and alcohol service, and then there's also a 12-bed withdrawal unit at Belmont Hospital that's run by Hunter New England, and it's the central intake number is the way to get through there. So just very briefly, we talked a bit about this in the last webinar, but not everybody needs inpatient withdrawal. Usually people end up requiring inpatient withdrawal if they've got a very complicated withdrawal, so they've got a history of alcohol withdrawal seizures or delirium tremens, or if they're otherwise medically unstable, so they've got another significant concurrent medical condition, and or if they've got another significant mental health condition, that might be a reason for them to be admitted. And I guess the last reason is sometimes we admit patients because they don't have any of those categories above, but they have a very unsupportive, non-ideal home situation. Everybody else at the home is using drugs, so sometimes we admit patients for that reason.
Thanks, Adrian. There's another question here. Any interpersonal group therapy available for patients?
We don't use interpersonal therapy in groups at the Mental Health and Substance Use Service, but a number of motivational, psychoeducational support counselling groups.
We've had a few people who we've seen the treatment, and the patient has been HNECC patient, and towards the end of their treatment, they've recognised that they need to go back to HNECC, and they've found that those groups have been very, very helpful, and they appreciate the group support and support from the other group members as well. So I don't know if that addresses that.
Yeah, and what would you say about, although it's not therapy, what are your recommendations to people about attending AA or Smart Recovery?
Excellent. The evidence is quite good, and what I always recommend to clients when they present is that you only find out if it suits you if you attend and give these things a go. So some people find them really useful and really helpful. Another person will attend the same service, whether it's one of these services or whether it's an AA or NA meeting, and find that a group of people don't agree. They have a different philosophy, but they certainly try and it's useful.
I think we're having trouble with volume, so just to finish off, Kristen.
Okay. So we've got a link there for the previous webinars. They should all be going up. I think the first two are up on the PECC website, and we'll be trying to get the previous one and this one up as soon as we can. And the slides will be available there as well. And in the coming days or weeks, we'll be sending out follow-up surveys to those people that have participated in the webinar series, to get your feedback on how it's gone. And you can also contact us about through the PHN about getting CPD points and things like that. But we have everyone's registration, so we'll be sending that out as we can. But other than that, I guess I would just thank everyone here tonight and all the presenters that have presented in the previous webinars as well. And thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you and good night.
Thanks.